Pastoralists in the modern world. The topics to be discussed in this course include pastoral nomads and their movements, colonial rule, and pastoral life, pastoralism in Africa. Nomads are people who do not live in one place but move from one area to another to earn their living. In many parts of India we can see nomadic pastoralists on the move with their herds of goats and sheep, or camels and cattle. Pastoral nomads and their movements. In the mountains. The GUJJAR Bakarwals. The GUJJAR Bakarwals of Jammu and Kashmir are pastoral nomads who move in groups called kafila. Their movements are governed by the cold and snow. In winters when the high mountains are covered with snow, these GUJJARs move down to the low hills of the Shivalik range. On the onset of summer, when the snow melts and the mountains become lush and green, these pastoralists move back to the mountains. The GADDI shepherds. The GADDI shepherds of Himachal Pradesh spent their winter in the low hills of Siwalik range, grazing their flocks in scrub forests. By April they moved north and spent the summer in Lohil and Spiti. When the snow melted and the high passes were clear, many of them moved onto higher mountain meadows. By September they began their return movement. On the way they stopped once again in the villages, reaping their summer harvest and sowing their winter crop. The GUJJAR cattle herders. The GUJJAR cattle herders of Kurumas and Garhwal come down to the dry forests of the Babar in the winter. They go up to the high meadows or the Bughils in the summer season. Many of them were originally from Jammu and came to the Uttar Pradesh hills in the 19th century in search of good pastures. The BHOTIAS, SHERPAS and KINNAURI. The BHOTIAS, SHERPAS and KINNAURI follow the cyclic movement, which helps them to adjust to seasonal changes and make best use of pastures. When the pasture was exhausted or unusable in one place, they moved their herds and flocked to new areas. This continuous movement also allowed the pastures to recover. It prevented their overuse. Pastoral nomads and their movements. On the plateaus, plains and deserts. The DHANGARS. The DHANGARS of Maharashtra stay in the central plateau of Maharashtra during the monsoon. This is a semi-arid region. By October they begin their movement towards Konkan. Here their cattle help to manure the fields and hence they are welcomed by the Konkani peasant. As soon as the monsoon sets in, they retreat back to the semi-arid land of Maharashtra. The GOLLAS and KURUMAS and KURUBAS. The GOLLAS herded cattle. The KURUMAS and KURUBAS reared sheep and goats and sold woven blankets. They lived near the woods, cultivated small patches of land, engaged in a variety of petty trades and took care of their herds. Unlike the mountain pastoralists, it was not the cold and the snow that defined the seasonal rhythms of their movement, rather it was the alternation of the monsoon and dry season. In the dry season they moved to the coastal tracts, and left when the rains came. The BANJARAS. BANJARAS were yet another well-known group of graziers. They were to be found in the villages of Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra. In search of good pasture land for their cattle, they moved over long distances, selling plow cattle and other goods to villagers in exchange for grain and fodder. The RAIKAS. In the deserts of Rajasthan lived the RAIKAS. The rainfall in the region was meager and uncertain. On cultivated land, harvests fluctuated every year. Over vast stretches no crop could be grown. So the RAIKAS combined cultivation with pastoralism. By October, when these grazing grounds were dry and exhausted, they moved out in search of other pasture and water, and returned again during the next monsoon. How was pastoral life sustained? They had to judge how long the herds could stay in one area, and know where they could find water and pasture. They needed to calculate the timing of their movements, and ensure that they could move through different territories. They had to set up a relationship with farmers on the way, so that the herds could graze in harvested fields and manure the soil. They combined a range of different activities such as cultivation, trade, and herding to make their living. Colonial rule and pastoral life. How did the life of pastoralists change under colonial rule? How did the life of pastoralists change under colonial rule? Forests Act restricted movements of pastoralists in the forests. Through these acts, some forests which produced commercially valuable timber like deodar or sal were declared reserved. No pastoralist was allowed access to these forests. Some customary rights were granted to them. Forests were marked as protected and reserved. British officials were suspicious of these pastoral groups. The Criminal Tribes Act was passed in 1871. Taxes were imposed on cattle which went up rapidly. How did the pastoralists cope with these changes? Pastoralists reduced the number of cattle or began to find new pastoral lands. Many rich pastoralists settled down at one place and began to cultivate land. They left their nomadic life. Poor pastoralists were hit hard by the colonial policies and they lost their cattle. Nowhere to go, they began to work as daily wage laborers in the agricultural fields. Many pastoralists adjusted to the colonial rule. They reduced the number of cattle and also began to look for new sources of earning. Pastoralism in Africa. The Maasai. The Maasai. Changes in way of life. Maasai lived primarily in East Africa. Before colonial times, Maasai land stretched over a vast area from North Kenya to the steppes of northern Tanzania. In the late 19th century, European imperial powers cut Maasai land into half. The best grazing lands were gradually taken over for white settlement and the Maasai were pushed into arid zone with uncertain rainfall and poor pastures. Land cultivation. In pre-colonial period the Maasai pastoralists dominated the agriculturalist both economically and politically. The British colonial government encouraged local peasants to cultivate land. The borders are closed. From the late 19th century, the colonial government began imposing various restrictions on the mobility of African pastoralists. Not all were equally affected. The Maasai society was divided into two social categories: the elders and the warriors. The elders formed the ruling group while warriors consisted of younger people, who defended the community and organized cattle raids. British appointed chiefs of different subgroups of Maasai, who were made responsible for the affairs of the tribe. The chiefs appointed by the colonial government often accumulated wealth over time. They had both pastoral and non-pastoral income, and could buy animals when their stock was depleted. However, the poor pastoralists who depended only on their livestock did not have the resources to tide over bad times. In times of war and famine, they lost nearly everything. For more educational content like this, keep watching Tritones Academy.